Crimea has become incredibly expensive, destabilized, and almost impossible to manage. It means that it is, most importantly, completely humiliating for the Russian government, for Putin right now, who sees Crimea as his prize jewel in the empire of Russia, right? It's a strategy that is something I didn't see coming, but it is incredibly successful. Russia has decided to focus all of their air defense systems in the last few weeks just around Moscow and around Putin's palaces, because that is what Putin is prioritized with: himself, his own safety, and the oligarchs around him.
Ireland is facing uncomfortable questions about the legal supply route that may still be helping Russia's war machine. Ukraine is hitting Russian logistics in occupied Crimea, while Russia keeps escalating here in Kyiv in Ukraine, attacking homes, infrastructure, and even sacred sites. Irish journalist Caolan Robertson has investigated the Irish connection to Russia, reported from the scene of the Lavra strike, and even had Russian missile fragments land on his own balcony. Caolan, welcome back.
It's so nice to be back here in Kyiv with you. So this is amazing.
I'm happy. Caolan, so you went for a vacation back home, and suddenly you came up with a huge resonate story. I remember when we were talking with you on the phone, you said among all of your trips, among all of your investigations, reports you made so far, this one was something different and bigger, and something is shifting and changing. So your investigation about Irish plant, well, the first resonance is that it's connected to Russia. And another thing that draw everybody's attention, it's somehow linked to Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska. So just tell me everything from the beginning. What is going on, and how did you find out about the plant? Yes.
This was one of the wildest stories that I've ever come across. So there's been investigations that I was reading about, sort of rumbles of information about a Russian-owned refinery that was sending ships to Russia every single month. And it sounded too insane to be true, that Ireland would still be doing this 4 years after the full-scale invasion. So I decided to go and check it out myself. It's so hard to find out what's actually happening in the world right now unless you can physically go to a place and investigate it for yourself. And the second I arrived in this leafy, quiet village where people were drinking pints of Guinness on the west coast of Ireland, I immediately saw rows and rows of Russian signs everywhere. This was like the last place you would ever expect to see something like this. You know, this is a place where you walk into one of the local pubs and everyone like goes quiet, and you know, there's live music playing. It's like, oh, there's a foreigner, there's an outsider here. Who could this be? You know, it's one of those places. And suddenly there are signs in Irish and Russian, and the whole thing felt immediately from that moment suspicious and strange. And from a few hours of us actually driving towards the refinery, looking into it, we ended up getting followed and chased. And this is in the documentary I'm dropping in the next few days, by a car with tinted windows. Very suspicious. There were CCTV cameras all around this village.
Car stopping right now that's kind of looks like it's following us. It's strange. Look, he stopped right there. Isn't that weird? This is honestly so on edge. So we've just been driving here to take a shot of the Russian signs, and this car has pulled up and just stopped right behind us, which is weird. And you do have this feeling like you're being followed everywhere here. And it is owned by Russians. But this shouldn't be how it feels, standing here in the west coast of Ireland, this sleepy village, and then there's sort of cars following you. Now he's pulled in again, parking again. Isn't this weird? What do you think? You think this is weird?
And there was just this general dark vibe in the whole village. And this is again, I love Ireland. I grew up in Ireland. This is the opposite of anything I have ever seen in the green fields of the West Coast. And the longer I was there, the darker it got. You know, I stayed in the local pub and I started speaking to workers, and they were telling me, you know, that the Russians bought this before the full-scale invasion. Production started ramping up just before 2022. They all believe it's going directly towards Russia's war. And then it started skyrocketing after the full-scale invasion started, and Irish exports started going up. And I was like, this is completely out of control. And I wanted to go on the website to see who and what the board of directors were. And I looked at Google Maps, 2 minutes down the road, typed on the location like we do, And it said that it was a .ru website. The entire website was in Russian, so I had to use a VPN to even access it, right? So all the signs are in Russian, the website's in Russian. It's completely bizarre. And then I use the VPN, I see all the board of directors are Russian names, not just regular Russian names, but people directly connected to the Kremlin, people connected to Russia's war machine and Russia's industry. People that are literally sanctioned by the UK government who are owning this refinery. And the rabbit hole just kept getting worse and worse. So I just stood there in front of the refinery and I said, right now, as I'm speaking, there's a ship leaving the port behind me and it's headed straight for St. Petersburg. Open a vessel app and you could see the Irish flag and the Russian flag side by side. There's no hiding it. And I emailed every single local politician, every single councillor, and they put down the phone. They ignored the email. One replied and said, we're not speaking to you ever. Local journalists hadn't covered it, hadn't spoken about it. And there was just this silence around the whole thing. The Irish Times were the only newspaper in the whole country that had spoken about this. And it didn't make any sense. That video blew up, it got millions of views. People started asking questions. The politicians kept disappearing. So because I was nestled in with the community, I'd made some friends with farmers, I'd made some friends with some of the people that live and work in that area. I asked them for tips. I said, how on earth do I find a councillor, a politician, someone? You know, this makes no sense. In Britain, in Ireland, if you want to go and speak to your local politician, there's usually an office you can go to. They were all boarded up, they were all silent, they were all empty, no one was answering calls. One person said, there's one place you can go, and that's tomorrow morning, if you have a pair of Wellingtons, there's an agricultural farming show. So we went to this muddy field first thing in the morning, and there they were, the councillors, the politicians, people that have defended this refinery from the beginning. And I went straight up to them and I said, why are there signs everywhere here in Russian? And they said they didn't know, they had no answers.
While Russia's still waging its war on the biggest country in Europe, you wouldn't have any moral concerns with this still being part of it, financially even. I mean, 14 ships every month go to St. Petersburg, directly from the port here.
I don't think it should be sanctioned. There's no Russians working there. It's all
Why are there
Irish people.
signs in Russian, do you think, everywhere?
I don't know.
No idea.
I don't know. I've no idea.
Because it's strange, we're here in the west of Ireland and there's signs in Russian everywhere.
Yeah, well,
You don't think it's weird?
I don't know.
There is a vibe that I get from politicians when I'm talking to them, and I can tell when they're talking shit and tell when they're lying. And you can tell talking to these ministers that they were talking shit and that they were paid. That's what I think. One of these councillors even had the audacity to say, actually, if it was Israel that these ships were going to, then we would stop them straight away, right? That shows Ireland's entire sanctions hypocrisy.
Would you support sanctions?
No, I wouldn't sanction it because people's livelihoods are on the line here.
If the refinery was sending materials to Netanyahu, would you say it should be sanctioned?
I won't.
I had this pit in the bottom of my stomach that something was wrong here, something's going deeply wrong here. And that was in the fact that I had to go to an obscure farming show in the middle of nowhere just to try and get answers from these people, and they didn't want to say a single thing. And that's because there's big money in Russia's supply chain in the rest of Europe. There are politicians, there are people in the media who are making hard cash from the Russians still. And that's blood money. And that's why I don't feel any guilt confronting any of these people, exposing these people and putting these videos out, because I think they're taking blood money from the Russians for covering up what they're doing. When I was standing there in the town, the moment I arrived, that was the night that Kyiv was under a huge missile attack that hit the shopping centre.
Missiles were pounding, 60 of them, the city. And parts of those missiles could have come from there. It's absolutely insane.
It was outrageous. The exact same day this city that we both live in is getting hit with missiles, in which components in those missiles could have come directly from this refinery. No one wants to talk about it. Is absolutely fucking outrageous.
How this supply chain working again?
So it's actually a really simple supply chain. The biggest alumina refinery in the whole of Europe, this is the stuff that makes alumina, is in Ireland, and it's owned by Russians, and its biggest market is Russians. Every single month, every 2 days, 14 ships leave that port filled with this white powder. It goes to St. Petersburg, then it gets on a train and it goes to Siberia, and it gets smelted into high quality aluminum. And aluminum, it's used in stepladders, household goods, stuff in this studio, but what it's mainly used for, without a doubt, is warfare, modern warfare, drones, missiles, the kind of stuff that comes into this country every single day to kill Ukrainians. And Russia heavily relies on this. It's a huge amount of material. And the Irish government have denied that this is going to weapons. The politicians that I spoke to said, well, actually, we asked the Russians. They literally told me they asked the Russians, and the Russians told us, oh, no, it's not going to the weapons. It's going to household goods. And they gave the Irish assurances. Russia, the country that lies more than any other on the planet, assured the Irish that they weren't doing anything naughty with this powder. And the Irish believe them still to this day for some reason. So this stuff is critical for warfare, critical for Russia's war machine, even if it wasn't used in warfare and you want to play benefit of the doubt. This is still a raw material for Russia's industry. This is still hundreds of millions of euros every single year. The main thing that makes this so outrageous is Russia cannot fight this war alone. They need friends, they need allies in Europe, in the rest of the world. And Ireland is happy to be one of their friends. It was one of the most frustrating, infuriating, and embarrassing things I've ever had to report on in my life. As an Irish person, not even a journalist, coming from a country, knowing that the government of the country I'm from is happy to facilitate the kind of war crimes that we talk about on this show every single day is absolutely sickening. And I'm not going to stop reporting on it until something's done about it. That plant can be nationalized, it can be diversified. There's an alumina shortage right now because of the war in Iran. The Strait of Hormuz means that all of Europe is desperate for this stuff. Russia doesn't need to be the only buyer. Everyone's desperate for it. The reports that I made had 11 million views. The reports showing the hypocrisy from the councillors, the avoidance of questions from the local politicians, and just the goal of and showing these ships leaving every single day. And those videos got millions of views because no other journalist had gone there with a camera and made videos like that and made films like that. People had written reports, but no one had gone in there and done that because it was dangerous in a lot of ways. There was Russians everywhere. It was risky, and you're not in the club anymore if you report these things. I was laughed at and humiliated in the Irish media for doing this. Newspapers, radio broadcasts, politicians said, who is this journalist? He doesn't even have any training. He doesn't even have any back experience. Why is he here? Why is he shaking all this up? Well, these newspapers have sat in Ireland for years and years and years while one of the biggest refineries in their country has helped Russia, and they wrote nothing about it. And suddenly a journalist with no training, a journalist from the outside, comes in, blows it up. It embarrasses the journalists in that country and the politicians. And that's why I had such a fierce backlash from leaving. Honestly, I left Ireland feeling like really sort of despised in a lot of ways. Because in Ireland, you can do your job as a journalist, you can maybe rock the boat a little bit, but to actually go against the government like that, to actually expose what's going on, is a no-no. Because the Irish government put hundreds of millions of euros every single year into the mainstream media, into RTE News, into news outlets all across Ireland, and they don't want to talk about this. So it's very unusual for a journalist to come in that's independent and be able to say blatantly, this is happening and it's wrong. If you look at this graph, this shows people typing in the word of the Russian refinery, Ohanish, and the spike here in the last week is after I arrived in Ireland. This graph is something I'm incredibly proud of because it also shows the power of real investigative journalism. If you actually care about the story, if you really care about getting something out, you don't need to be a major institution anymore. You don't need to be a major organization. You can be an independent journalist with nothing but the ambition to tell truth and still put a story into the mainstream media. The moment I left Ireland, the Ohanish, the Russian refinery, had about 10 news stories written about it before I landed. Now it's about 400. And now everyone knows the name Ohanish. Everyone knows about the Russian refinery in Ireland. And 2 days ago, Ireland responded to this criticism because the backlash was literally obscene against the government. The Taoiseach, which is the Prime Minister of Ireland, was summoned to a meeting at the top of the EU about this with questions demanding why on earth this was happening. Every single newspaper in Europe mentioned that refinery. That reporting, just me and a camera, put that entire subject into the center stage, and that was exactly my plan, because people should be knowing what is happening and the Russians don't want you to know the truth. So a result of that is, yesterday, the Irish government has just asked the European Union for the avenue of potential funding if that refinery was to be nationalized. They said, if we take this away from the Russians, if it's no longer owned by the Russians and we nationalize it, can you help us with some of the funding? Which is a development because of this. That's basically saying, all right, we're actually looking at avenues to take it away from the Russians. And that is the power of reporting. And that's what made me want to be a reporter. That's why I'm so proud of this work and so proud of this specifically, because that is the whole point. To find something that is outrageous, that the world needs to know about, and to show it.
If this route to Russia cut, will Moscow feel the changes, or the Kremlin will just find another way out?
Russia will be pissed off if this route closes. These are huge ships, massive tankers, filled with this white powder, and a huge percentage of Russia's alumina relies on this refinery. Again, it's the biggest refinery in the whole of Europe. This would heavily impact Russian industry. It would heavily impact Russia's pocket right now. There are only a few places in the world you can actually get this stuff from, and it would be a massive headache. And this is why Russians don't want journalists talking about this. This is why they're paying off politicians. They don't want this supply route cut. And they were very happy for this to go on for 4.5 years until I showed up.
Could you imagine how many such plans could be connected to Russia in Europe that we have no idea about?
Well, yeah, well, this is why I reported on the Shadow Fleet for so long as well, right? Because there are thousands of ships still sailing right now as we're talking all around the world. I call them warships, helping Russia, transporting oil, stolen Ukrainian grain through EU waters everywhere. They're not being seized enough. So Ireland is just a small example of how Russia is helping Europe. But I focused on it, A, because I'm Irish and I feel like I have a duty to expose it. But B, because it represents Europe's larger hypocrisy. Countries like Ireland pretend that they're supporting Ukraine. You're not supporting Ukraine if you're helping Russia at all, categorically. If you're taking money from Russia, you're not supporting Ukraine. And it's hypocritical, and that's the case for so many other countries in Europe. And Ireland was just one example. If you look at a map, there are other refineries, Europe's still buying Russian oil, they're still buying Russian gas, they're still allowing Russians visas, But I mean, all we can do as journalists is expose as much as possible and talk about it. And in some ways, it works.
Before we're going to finish this blog of our interview, I just want to ask you, what do you want Irish people to understand through this investigation? I know it's not about blaming just regular Irish people, but just what do you want them to understand from this?
Regular Irish people didn't really know about this, and most of them were disgusted by this. This isn't a hit piece on the Irish people. This is a criticism of the government that's allowed this to happen. Ireland was one of the most welcoming countries to Ukrainian refugees because there's a shared culture and history. Ireland knows what colonialism is. Ireland knows what it is to have its language erased, just like Ukraine, from an empire next door. And that's why so many Irish people open their doors to refugees, not politicians, but regular, everyday Irish people, because they don't want this in their country. And they didn't know about this happening in their country. I had tens of thousands of Irish people shocked in my comments, saying they had no idea this was happening just down the road. And they were disgusted, rightfully. And that's my intention. I wanted them to know this.
Let's move to Crimea at this stage. So Ukraine is, for the last weeks and even months, successfully attacking Russian air defense in occupied Crimea, all the logistics routes. They're kind of creating very uneasy life for people there. So how do you assess all this such strategy of Ukrainian armed forces? And do you think that for Russia, the occupied Crimea with such of activity of Ukrainian army is no longer a place that is becoming expensive place and unsafe for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, Russians didn't expect any of this to happen at all. They thought
You think so?
I don't think so. They stole Crimea in 2014 and they thought that was going to be theirs forever, their holiday destination on stolen land. That was going to be theirs. Also, Putin endlessly, he went to Crimea after he stole it and he put his flag in the sand and said, this is the unsinkable aircraft carrier. This is, he referred to it as a huge heart of the Russian Empire. And the Russians have been trying to steal Crimea since the 1700s, since Catherine the Great at Making Shit Up arrived and tried to, lie about everything. There's been inhabitants of Crimea for 100,000 years. There was many people there before the Russians, and there'll be many people after the Russians. But the reason this is happening right now is because Russia's size has always been its strength, right? That's why Napoleon and Hitler couldn't get to Stalingrad, couldn't invade because of its geography, the mud, the mountains. And now that's its weakness. Russia has decided to focus all of their air defense systems in the last few weeks just around Moscow and around Putin's palaces, because that is what Putin is prioritized with, himself, his own safety, and the oligarchs around him. But that's very unfortunate to the holidaymakers of Russia who were hoping to go to Crimea this year. It's a strategy that is something I didn't see coming, but it is incredibly successful and incredibly effective. It's just the beginning of it. By Crimea having a state of emergency declared by the occupying government, it means that Crimea has become incredibly expensive, destabilized, and almost impossible to manage. It means that it is, most importantly, completely humiliating for the Russian government, for Putin right now, who sees Crimea as his prize jewel in the empire of Russia, right? This is like the last place for him. And I think this is about a PR humiliation. The Ukrainians, there's no way that the Ukrainians can right now take back Crimea, not in the next year or two. The entire peninsula is heavily mined. There are still a lot of Russian soldiers there, and the Ukrainians are still focused on what's happening in the Donbass, but that was never the intention. It wasn't the intention to take it back. It was to destabilize it and make it impossible to run, make it run dry, empty it out, and to make it incredibly humiliating for Russia. And this is a part of a much bigger strategy. Moscow was on fire just 10 days ago, 1,000 drones, St. Petersburg just 10 days before that, right in front of the worst people on the planet, Candace Owens and Andrew Tate and all of these people, that influences that Putin had taken in. And Ukraine did that as part of the same strategy, to humiliate Russia when their influencers were arriving in St. Petersburg. And now it's the same thing in Moscow. And it's about attacking the very core of what Russia projects on the world stage, and that is the image of power, of a powerful nation that should never be fucked with. That is what Russia has always put out. And that, if it starts cracking, which it looks like it is, if that starts shattering, then the rest of the world are going to start asking what Russia really represents. And I never really thought that there could be an end on the horizon. And I don't think I thought that until I started seeing what's happening in Crimea now, and started seeing these really serious deep strikes in Moscow. Remember this time last year, the year before that, the idea was put by the international media that if Ukraine put one missile into Moscow, it'd be World War III, we'd all be nuked, we'd all be dead, Ukraine would be wiped off the map.
But after Rostov, after Kursk operation, we have realized that, it's already Russian territory, and nothing happened.
Yeah, and there's another fact to this that I don't think anyone has really mentioned, and that is, I was standing on the rooftop of my building last night in the center of Kyiv, and I didn't hear the sound of buzzing of drones, and I haven't heard that since I got back in the last couple of weeks. And it's very likely, there's ballistic missiles, that's something that Russia's always done, but there's a very, very real chance that this could be the quietest period in terms of drones, because the repeater towers in Belarus have been switched off. The repeater towers that Lukashenko allowed Putin to use to guide those drones into Kyiv every single night. And that's because Zelensky turned up, said to the president of Belarus recently, if you don't stop what you're doing, if you don't stop helping the Russians, we're going to bomb every single one of your telecommunication systems, and we're going to do it tomorrow. And the Ukrainians have shown that they can do that very, very easily.
Absolutely. And now, at this moment, just Lukashenko and Putin meeting ended in Valdai, in Putin's residency. And for the first time in history, they are not giving any press conference after the diplomacy meetings between Minsk and Moscow. It's usually something in front of journalists. And for the first time, if I'm not mistaken, nothing, zero, silence.
Because what happened in that meeting did not go right for Putin. Putin, basically held him hostage for 2 days in that house. It was kind of crazy. It's very unusual for a diplomatic event like that to go on for as long as it did. I was worried he would never leave the house. But, Lukashenko would have turned around to Putin and said, what the hell am I supposed to do? Look, I know I helped you out in 2022, but the Ukrainians will literally destroy all of our network towers. We're already weak enough. He knows that there is not an appetite in Belarus to attack Ukraine. The everyday people would be sick of it. There aren't the forces to do it. And also, he's kind of looking at what's happening in Russia, and he's like, this guy can't even protect his own country. Russia can't even protect itself from being on fire every single day. Never mind me. So that sort of protection, the offer of protection that Russia has as an ally, is gone. So I think that meeting went very badly. I think Lukashenko is now basically walking back home and saying, I'm going to be, he's not going to help Ukraine, but he's no longer going to facilitate it. And just think about how significant that is. In 2022, this is the country that allowed that famous convoy to come steaming towards this capital. They allowed that convoy to cross its border from the north here and come down. And that same country is now too scared to even turn on the phone signal for Russia. That is huge. This is the same country that facilitated the full-scale invasion. It represents a huge shift, and I think it's why we're not hearing the buzzing at night. Really, all of these things individually don't sound like a lot, but when you put them all together, Crimea on fire, Moscow on fire, St. Petersburg humiliation, Belarus walking out the door, this is a catastrophic situation.
And actually this night, as you mentioned, Russia launched 9 Iskander rockets on the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. And I think none of them hit the target. Yeah, all of them were neutralized, thanks God.
Yeah, obviously I can't film any of this stuff, but I actually can say that as I was a witness last night, I saw every single one of them get shot down from my bedroom window, which was kind of unbelievable.
Yeah, I know. Every time I'm waking up from the explosion, I open up my phone, and you're just sending me privately, of course.
Very private, yeah.
Yes, the videos of everything that are happening on your balcony. So Russia made a huge, one of the biggest attacks on Ukrainian capital just a few weeks ago, hitting infrastructure, but also hitting one of the sacred places in Ukraine, a place where a lot of believers were going, like millions of them were praying there. It's a Kyiv Pechersk Lavra, an ancient church in Ukrainian capital. And one of the pieces of the debris of the rockets hit your balcony. Okay, how was it? Where were you at that moment?
I think that night was the most shocking night of my whole life. I've been living in Ukraine for years. I've been to Syria, but I just walked through the archway and saw what looked like Dante's Inferno. It looked like something from the Old Testament. This is the beautiful gold roof that has been there for nearly 1,000 years. I'm not religious, but I understand how sacred this place is. And there are red and blue flames pouring from the back of it. And there are firefighters, and I walk forward, desperately trying to put out the blaze, run inside the Lavra to stop it. And then more explosions start coming from the sky. And the firefighters run back inside, everyone scatters. And it feels honestly, like the end of the world. And I ran inside, there was police tape, and they didn't want me to go in, but how I desperately wanted to show what was going on here. And found priests and bishops that had just been woken up, because they all live on this monastery, desperately trying to save artifacts that are some of the most valued pieces of European history, running with them in panic in the rain. And I filmed every second of it because people need to see what Russia really represents, the country that pretends to care about Europe, about history, about values, about religion. In the 1700s, when the gold domes were still glistening on the Lavra, Moscow was just a swamp. Now, of course, Moscow is just a swamp with Russians living in it.
But today you got from Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukrainian president, the order for covering the Kyiv Pechersk Lavra explosion or not? Not explosion, but just attack of Russians.
So this is awarded to journalists and many people in Ukraine who, I guess it's just an award from the government for my work over the last few years. It's not tied to anything specifically. Zarina Zabriskie, my colleague, also received this award. So I think it's, they said it's an award for, dedication to the truth. And the truth and it's for documenting Russia's war crimes.
So it was symbolically held in Kyiv Pechersk Lavra.
I was shocked this morning. They texted me and said, it's going to be held at the Lavra. And I was like, is the Lavra okay? Is it still even put back together? Is it okay? And it was like night and day. This morning was very surreal. It's the first time I've gone back to the Lavra, and it's, you know what today looks like. It's a beautiful Sunday, stunning blue sky. And I walked back through that exact same arch again. And it looked like, it was stunning. It was a fairy tale of, it was Zelensky, Olena, Putin, the entire Ukrainian government, 40 ambassadors. It was absolutely stunning. Music playing. And in some ways, I was sitting there just at the back, having this moment of disassociation, thinking, I was standing here 10 days ago, looking at this building on fire, pouring with rain. And now it's one of the most beautiful Sunday mornings, probably the proudest Sunday of my whole life. I'm being given this medal and the trumpets are playing. And it kind of epitomizes my entire experience in Ukraine in some ways. And that's this light and dark. Moments in Odessa, I had exactly the same thing. It was nights of this abuse from Russia, drones screaming from the sky, crashing into everything. And then in the day, the most beautiful sunrise that I've ever seen over the Black Sea, and this peace and this serenity. And these two polar worlds still exist here every single day. And it's really everywhere here. It's why I think, even in the weather, Ukraine has the coldest winters and the hottest summers, I think, of anywhere I've ever spent time with. And there is something here about just the beauty that is still surviving here every single day, and the darkness of what Russia's bringing every single night. And I just couldn't stop thinking about that this morning at this ceremony, listening to the trumpets, staring straight up at that same building. It was
Yeah, it's a kind of a surreal. But anyways, Caolan, you deserve it, and my congratulations for. I mean, it just every piece that you're doing about Russia's war in Ukraine, watched by millions of people. That's a lot of dedication and sacrifice behind it. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much for having me today.